This week, David Hunt from Prelude is with us to discuss scientific approaches to security testing. Then Jerry Bell, the man behind Infosec's newest community water cooler, Infosec.Exchange, joins us to talk about the state of Infosec culture and recent Mastodon migrations. Finally, in the enterprise security news, security funding is back, baby. Security unicorn layoffs continue, though. We talk zombiecorns, IronNet struggles, Netrix acquires Remediant. We talk breaches, LastPass, Rackspace, Okta via GitHub, Slack via GitHub. GitHub announces 2FA improvements. I wonder why. AI generates insecure code, cyber insurance challenges, and Fire Festival fraudster funding more frauds. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Bird Day. This is episode 301, recorded on Thursday, January 5th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler?
You know, Adrian, I was this close, half tempted to showing you the bird, and then I was like, no, that might be over the top.
That would have been great.
I was really going to do it. I was close.
I would appreciate it. I mean, 60% of our audience wouldn't have noticed, so.
Yeah, because they would have just heard you laughing at randomness. I got you. But no,
Yeah.
What's your favorite bird? My favorite bird is Tweety Bird from Snoopy.
My favorite bird is the grackle. If you've ever watched a grackle, they're hilarious. They're nature's stand-up comics. Yeah, look up videos of grackles. They're just absolutely
I'm rapidly
birds.
Googling in the background for sure.
All right, Tyler, I need to call shenanigans. Did you really just call Woodstock Tweety Bird?
Damn it!
Ooh.
Oh, you are so right. You knew who I meant, but
Ooh.
Yes, you're right.
I knew what you meant. Woodstock is great.
Woodstock is who I meant.
Man.
Yes.
Controversy right at the beginning of the show.
Indeed, 2023 starts strong.
Let me finish the introductions here before we get into too much more. We also have the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well. I also do like Woodstock, and Woodstock is not Tweety Bird, but fun fact, depictions of birds freak me out. Real birds, okay, but depictions of birds, no. I'm just going to, get rid of the whole thing.
What do you mean by depictions? Oh, you mean like cartoon birds?
Well, pictures of birds, statues of birds. I was once at a wedding with an ice sculpture of a bird. That was the creepiest thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
Were they upset when you knocked it over?
When I kicked it and smashed it into pieces? Yeah, no. It was like
Also
this
joining
4-foot high ice bird. It was so creepy.
I don't know why you would find that creepy. That's fascinating to me.
Because it was creepy. It was not as cute as Woodstock.
So the other thing I want to add to our bird discussion, because I know Goose is going to be like, we got to get to the real meat of this. But the other thing I want to add to the bird discussion is birds are not real. Does anyone recognize that meme?
I do.
Yeah, birds aren't real. It's a thing. They're actually robots installed by the U.S. government. So just remember that.
I've heard that they're not real. What about all those dead birds that cats drag to my back door?
Fake. They're all fake. That's fake news. That's fake news.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had cats. I've had to clean up quite a few that were not quick enough to escape the orange tabby.
I feel like cats don't like me because I don't have a cat. There's a bunch of cats in the neighborhood, and they just keep. I don't know. Maybe it's a sacrifice or a gift that they think they are providing to the back of my house.
You're just giving off weird dog vibes.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely have a dog.
They do. Cats like to, they think of them as gifts, so they're trying to win you over.
It hasn't happened yet, Kat. Sorry, if you're listening.
Did you think even for a moment, Adrian, that this would have been like a massive opening to the show?
No, not at all. I thought this was going to be a quick one. So I do want to give a shout out for National Bird Day to an app called Merlin, because there's a bird I actually thought were bats, because I only heard it like right at dusk, in the early evening, and I just could not figure out what these birds were. And I found this app that I think is made by a nonprofit or a university called Merlin, and you can just hit record in this app, and like in seconds, if you record a bird sound, like it's identified it right away. It's taken that recording, it's matched it to a database, and you can help, and you can help update their database with new bird sounds. And I think they can ID by photos as well. And found out it was a killdeer is the name of the bird.
So Shazam for bird noises.
Shazam for birds. Yep.
I will say that Cardinals do not like it when you replay their bird song through like a Bluetooth speaker. They get very confused.
Oh yeah. No, I've thought about that. I've wondered about messing with some birds.
Yeah, I put a Bluetooth speaker up near the roof, and they kept flying in and like dive bombing it. They did not understand who this interloper was in the neighborhood.
I bet. Oh my God, that's funny. All right, and as you've heard speaking, we also have the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf, is with us as well.
Hello, all. And my favorite bird is the cassowary, because it's probably one of the closest birds to a modern-day dinosaur.
Looks like it's designed to headbutt the crap out of you if you annoy it.
Yeah, and it's got sharp claws like a velociraptor, which is my favorite dinosaur. Not that you asked.
That's a pretty badass bird pick, I have to say. All right, we got a quick announcement here. You can join our Discord channel and talk about your favorite birds or dinosaurs, and you can chat with hosts, ask questions during the show, and do all kinds of fun stuff on there. You can go to securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite to our Discord server. All right, and today we are talking about not birds anymore. We're going to leave that behind. We're talking about scientific approaches to security testing. We're excited to have David Hunt, co-founder and CTO with Prelude, with us today. David has a career spanning many industries, including enterprise, aerospace, and operational technology. Prior to Prelude, he led the team that built MITRE Caldera, which if you have dived into adversary simulation or security testing at all, you're probably familiar with that project. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I am kind of in the background trying to figure out how to spell grackle. So if anybody has that exact spelling, just shoot it over.
It's like Crackle, like the video service Crackle, but with a G.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Yep. So that's, I guess feel free to share your favorite bird if you want to do that before we move into
yes.
the interview.
Definitely. So my favorite bird is it's not going to be the most exciting, I don't think, out of today, but a cardinal, which already came up, but it's actually helpful to know that there are some tips and tricks I can use with the cardinals in my backyard to, let's say, get to know them better. So I really appreciate that call out.
What is it you like about cardinals? Is it like an aesthetic thing or something that they do?
Totally color. I love the red.
Color. Okay.
So blue jays are also in the list, but yeah, I love red.
Nice. Yeah, color-wise, I love eastern bluebirds, but we will move on from birds. So this is actually one of my
only if you want to.
This is actually one of my favorite topics. So I started a company back in 2017 with a good friend of mine, Kyle, and we quickly observed, like, the whole idea of the company was to reimagine consulting services if we were just going to do it from scratch. And one of the things we found is that, people just don't realize what they've gotten wrong. They don't know how to prioritize on the defense side. And a lot of our customers were small and medium-sized companies. So if they had any security staff, they had 1 to 3 security staff, so smaller companies here. And so we designed some services to help them, test their defenses, not like from a pen test perspective, but I guess from more of like a purple team, what you call a purple team perspective back then, which I think has evolved somewhat. And that's the reason, David, I wanted to have you on, is I'm very interested now that I'm seeing some companies focusing more on testing security teams and testing security environments and making sure everything works correctly. Because every time I analyze, I do like a postmortem on a breach or something like that, almost every single time there's just stuff misconfigured. People don't know how to find alerts in their environment. Just basic stuff that practice and testing would fix. Is that the same thing that kind of, like, maybe if you want to talk about how you got drawn into MITRE Caldera, and then maybe take us into Prelude from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think in a large way, just to touch on one of the things you were mentioning, we've been stuck in the industry for quite a while in being reactive to what's going on. So in a large way, that's centered around topics like CVEs, around patches and vulnerabilities. Something comes out, we have something very specific that comes out when a CVE number is published and released. We get a product and we have a version of that product that becomes the target. We look in our environment, we're very reactive. It takes us weeks to find and patch all of those things. Meanwhile, the rest of the environment is wide open. And so we've kind of gotten used to, in cybersecurity, to reacting, not being proactive. And testing is all about kind of moving that forward and being proactive with how you locate things, the structure and process to how you actually do that. And that's kind of the missing component that we've had for quite some time in the industry, looking back over the years. And so for me personally, I think I started to really, formulate a lot of my ideas and opinions on the matter when I was at MITRE on the Caldera project. And what brought me to MITRE originally to take on that work was the lack of efficacy in defensive products. And so what I mean by that is there's a significant amount of defensive products that exist, antivirus, EDR, WAF, there's all sorts of technologies that exist to protect us. And what we don't have are any ways to make rational decisions about which ones are working well for us, which ones are configured correctly, or in a lot of cases, which ones are even installed in the first place. So in a large environment, it can be tricky to even understand where you have coverage, even a little bit.
So when I was formerly at CRA, which owns the Security Weekly podcast, one of the things I had built was product testing. So also into questioning, like I had my suspicions, and I was trying to figure out how do we do this, in the B2B enterprise space. Like with consumer stuff, it's easy. You go to Best Buy, or Amazon or something like that. You buy a product, you test it, you review it, you publish the results. Even with a car, you can do that. But in enterprise security, getting your hands on a license for a lot of these products is not an easy task. You basically have to work with the company. They have to be comfortable with you doing the testing. And I've always had my suspicions, like, I wonder if some of these products, even when configured correctly, do they work at all? And some of my experiences doing that testing, the answer is no. Even in an ideal environment, I'm not sure some of these products really deliver, what they say they do in the box, which is important to know.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is there actually is no way at scale to understand that. And it's funny that you mentioned Best Buy, actually, because an example I like to give is this triggers all the way down from the consumer side to the enterprise side and even into the government side, which is if I walk into Best Buy today, you or I walk into Best Buy and are like, need to buy a laptop, grab one off the shelf, pick it out, and we say we want to buy an antivirus to go along with it. We as consumers, even at that level, that individual level, we have no way to determine or pick which AV that we want to use outside of things like, well, which color kind of resonates the best with me today. There isn't anything that will guide me to a rational decision.
Yeah, definitely. So, so kind of moving into, I think for me, the big question is, like, we know we have this gap here, but if you go through PCI, if you go through some of the regulations and even some of the standards we have, there's not really, like one of the things I was doing recently is putting together a cloud IR checklist. recently. And I was looking at some of the old ones that I was replacing, and none of them say anything about testing. With IR and disaster recovery and BCP and things like that, especially, it's my experience that if you haven't actually done it, you've maybe accounted for 50% of the things you need to do for it to go smoothly. And, I think that applies to security defenses as well. So how do we, aside from bringing a product to market and trying to educate people, do you see an opportunity, for compliance or regulation to come in here and say, hey, no, this is actually something that everybody should do? Or does some of that already exist and maybe I've overlooked it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that happening. So driven through policy, driven through compliance. And I think a lot of things that we've seen some evolution in this occurring with how the rapid pace to at least how public some of the attacks recently have been in the news. Ransomware attacks obviously getting quite a bit of attention. And a lot of these are taking advantage of not 0 days, things that are unknown, but taking advantage of things that are already known, things that if we had done proactive testing in certain environments, we'd be ahead of and patching and fixing issues. And so, I think a lot of these, a lot of the desire to do continuous security testing up front is going to be driven through policy and compliance. Yeah.
So we've talked about, how to convince people that this is something that they should do. And we've already seen a lot of different both open source and commercial efforts to bring this to people, to productize it. So let's kind of shift there. What is, and there's several use cases here, right? Like I often separated it into functional testing versus I forget what I called the other kind of testing, but basically the way I think of it is the control actually turned on? Is the email actually getting somewhere? So very functional testing. Is the span port is the sensor plugged into the right span port? That kind of very simple, like on off. The toaster isn't plugged in type situations. And then you have the much more difficult side of it, which is emulating adversaries and saying not only can you detect an attack, but can you detect a sneaky attack or a sneakier attack, and kind of stepping up the level of efforts there. So how do you approach that with a product and with customers? Do you separate those out into separate things, or does the adversary emulation stuff also serve as the functional testing? Is it not necessary to do them both separately?
Yeah, I think it's been an evolution, actually. So the way testing has kind of evolved in the security space has included areas like penetration testing for trying to find vulnerabilities and kind of the penetration of the network, the perimeter of the network itself. Vulnerability scans have kind of dominated that space for locating things. And that's been very proactive. And then you have what you've mentioned, which is more in the red teaming space and the purple teaming space, which is, hey, I've been tasked with understanding how my network and my environment would react if this particular APT were to come in, or if this particular type of behavior were to happen in the environment. I want to know how we would react, what alerts would trigger, how our defense would actually hold up. And that's kind of the current way that a lot of modern organizations are running now, which is bring in the purple team, bring in the red team, and get them to test everything continuously, but also manually. There's a little bit of autonomy that goes in there when it comes to some systems like Caldera, for example, that can be set up. But that testing is still what I'd call almost random, which is if you're tasked with emulating a particular APT, you can get a playbook of what they're used to doing. But what you do as a purple teamer or a red teamer is you grab sort of random behaviors that they're known to do. You apply them in the network and you try to bypass your defense, but there isn't a rhyme or reason. And there's a lot of nuance between one particular command that you could run and an obfuscated version of that. So there's a lot of cat and mouse that happens in red teaming and purple teaming, which is incredibly critical, very, very important role, but it's hard to scale. So when it comes to how do you actually turn that into a product that you can actually work on scaling, get it out, make it more accessible to more people, I think you have to add a little bit of structure on top of that. And so what we've been really focused on is, can we apply what we call a rule, which is basically a surface area on a particular type of device, call it a Windows laptop or a Linux server, and say, can we define a surface area on that machine, and can we write automated tests that are targeting that particular piece of surface area for known nodes? An example of that is kind of the traditional example, which is, will my defensive product quarantine a known malicious Office macro document? And we target that test. It should catch it every single time if the defense is on and configured correctly. And you turn that test on and say, run this every single day and make sure that defense is working. And you continue to repeat that process, and you have that continuous testing running on all of your endpoints all at the same time. And that enables you to kind of get a complete coverage and get a much better idea of what's going on.
Yeah, so it's kind of a like a sanity check, like a security controls regression test, right? Like you want to make sure that, one day all of a sudden, that's something I used to do as a pen tester. I'd always turn AV back on once I was done, but I would just disable AV. Back in the days, there weren't, when I pen tested, there weren't a whole lot of tamper controls there, and you could literally just net stop AV. Do whatever you need to do and turn it back on, which, it would fail the regression testing, if I were in the middle of doing that. But is that the idea there?
That's absolutely it. Yeah. So I think the missing component that we're really trying to push on, and this has been missing in the offensive security space for quite a while, is a lot of structure on how do you actually attack the problem set, not just following an APT playbook, but an actual structure that allows you to target each component of the endpoint in a methodical, very scientific approach on how you would do that. And so I'll give it, I think one of the best examples I've seen in recent years of this, which I did a couple of years ago, which is running a continuous test on a particular Linux server that was, for the most part, air-gapped. A sysadmin came in one day and started updating packages on that machine. And in order to update packages on that particular machine, they needed to enable a proxy. So they set a proxy up from an internet-enabled server to this air-gapped server, installed their things, and then forgot to remove that proxy when they signed off for the day. And in that case, we had lateral movement tests running on that box. And just one day out of the blue, that agent that we had running the tests was capable of moving across the network through that proxy, moving from that hoping to be air-gap system onto internet-enabled devices. And that was a case of catching something within a 24-hour period that could have been caught many, many months later by an adversary.
So that's one use case, and this is I'm going to hand off to Sean. Has a couple questions as well after I clarify on this. But it seems like you've got a couple use cases here. So one is what you're describing, like ensuring your controls are working as expected. The environment is configured as expected, and there's no surprises or no regressions. But also it seems to me like a key use case here would or should be to actually test your IR team. To test your SOC, to test make sure, the process part of it works, that the humans can find things in their systems when you're relying on a human to find something, and know what to do in those scenarios, know what their next step is to, contain and recover and eradicate and all those fun IR steps, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that as a huge use case, especially with companies and enterprises in particular that either have SOCs or they have internal purple teams that are in charge of writing rules, Sigma rules and so forth, in order to fire off alerts. And so what we've seen is kind of people approaching security testing in order to solve one of two problems. It's either efficacy of a defensive product, whatever that may be. It could be on the network, could be on the endpoint itself. Or it could be, hey, I want to test the behaviors of my response. That could be the IR team. That could be the team that's monitoring the alerts in the SOC. That could be, the user of an endpoint itself. Do they actually report something occurring? And it's kind of testing the overall response to various things occurring in real time.
Great, thank you. Sean here. So that leads directly into something I was going to ask around, does Prelude correlate the attack test to detection in the SIM to identify or associate with the activity that was performed? Or is it one of those things where it's identified and then the SOC is then doing that correlation?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both at the end of the day. And so what I mean by that is, so every time that we run an action inside of, every time we run a test, any alert that would get fired will include a tag that has our particular, tagging unit on it. So it helps you identify what's coming out of our system so you can filter and adjust to that. So that does allow you to filter or separate things coming from us from things coming from other places if you want to analyze it from that perspective. What we don't do is we don't tell you whether that alert is working or not. That's kind of up to you to analyze your own alerts and decide what's your own threshold. So the context of that alert could be incredibly important based on what it is, or it could be something that's incredibly low priority.
So along those lines, how easy would it be for an organization to identify if the appropriate event logging is not actually configured in order to detect that sort of activity? So, for example, if you're leveraging, say, Windows event logging, but certain events or event categories are not configured to be logged, then would Prelude help identify that, or would it just be a blank slate for the SOC?
No, that's actually a big advantage for running the continuous test on the endpoint. On that particular example, which is the Windows event logging, the way that we try to approach that and get people into this habit is deal with that on the endpoint itself, not within the SOC. And so the test itself has the ability to do the action as well as verify what the action's output was. So in this example, you might say, my test is to dump LSAS. And then you can say, well, what is the after effect of that? Let me check to see what Windows event logs occurred in the system and what matches the behavior, what was expected versus what was there. And let me ship that result off somewhere where it can be analyzed.
Okay, so it's not an automatic thing. It's more of a combination of what the tool is providing plus what the SOC or incident response is handling around that. Quick question about your tagging. Where does that get injected? Is that injected at the source, or is that something that can get injected as part of the SIM event forwarding flow?
Yeah. So in Operator, which is our command and control center that we have in play right now, you can inject it in two places. So you can inject it at the agent level, which is the thing running the tests in particular, or you can inject it into something that we call Outpost, which is where the agent sends the result to. And when it gets sent to that Outpost server, it's a little bit of a Python server. When that Python server accepts the output from the agent, it can then tag it before inserting it into your logging database.
Okay, cool. I've been involved in a number of Purple Team exercises over the years with different organizations of different sizes, and one of the biggest challenges often has been here are the vulnerabilities or here are the weaknesses in this environment, and here's what detection saw or what event kind of came out the other side as far as what we could correlate. But the big gap often seems to be, how do we fix that and how do we prioritize it? Is there something around Prelude that helps guide the customer to an effective, feasible solution for any specific issue or set of activities?
Yeah, that's actually a really big one, which is prioritization. So you've got N number of issues. What do you fix? In what order do you fix them, and so forth? We've battled that a lot and kind of kicked that around in a variety of different contexts. So what we're leaning into right now, kind of the lessons we've learned in spending time in red and purple teaming, is we want to try to catch all of the what we call the surface area issues that are the known bads first. We want to look at the endpoint holistically and say there are 10 things that should never occur on this particular type of endpoint. We know, for taking the dumping LSAS example, nobody should ever be able to dump LSAS on this computer no matter what. That would be a known. We'll call that a rule. Another one that we'd take is a malicious Office macro should always be quarantined. And so we've come up with a set of these tests that are based around these known rules. And what most of our tests are circulating around right now is, can we execute tests that are known knowns, verify that your defense is actually protecting you in those cases? And if not, and hopefully this is a small percentage of issues for most people, in those cases, you're not protected from those issues, go ahead and fix those as your first thing.
Okay.
So less of the nuanced like edge cases and more of the like big components.
Gotcha. So in your dumping LSAS example, obviously there's a few different ways to do it. Through Task Manager programmatically, which is leveraging that same method. There's a couple other methods such as Mimikatz. Settings, protected process is a way to help protect and identify when that sort of activity is occurring, including some detection and defense around that. Is Prelude looking at these different methods that attackers are using, or is it primarily a single approach to what the issue is as far as the activity that Prelude puts into it and what comes out the other side?
Yeah, this is actually where it gets a lot of fun because this comes up on purple teaming all the time. If you've been on a manual purple team assessment, which is you'll try in the dumping LSAS example, you'll say, hey, I'm going to try to do it this way. You get caught, you hop onto a different system and you try to do it a different way. And basically you're playing this cat mouse game in order to determine if you can find a way on a particular system to not get caught. And so to replicate that in a structured continuous security form that's autonomous, the way we do it is we define the rule and we say users should never be able to dump LSAS. So that's the rule. Underneath that, we develop tests. And we can have as many tests under that rule as we like that cover all the different implementations of dumping LSAS that we can think of, that we've seen in the wild, that have exploit code to them and so forth. And we allow you to schedule those tests to run on your endpoints at whatever sort of schedule that you'd like. So for example, you may say, I want to run this type of LSAS dump every day on this subset of computers. I want to run this other variation on this other subset. And you could have it kind of mix and match across your network. And what you're doing is looking for anything that triggers.
Okay, that's fair. So final question, does Prelude build on attack strategy based on what's vulnerable in the environment? So in other words, does it identify a vulnerable system and then identify what the next step could be based on that one, plus other information and knowledge about what's vulnerable in the environment, like an attacker would?
Yeah, no, we don't go that deep in that direction, I'd say. Our goal is to identify at the top level, how are your defenses protecting you against all of these different rule sets. So it's not about finding, is this device in particular vulnerable to kind of like say a CVE or something to that effect. It's more of, are your defenses protecting you against an attack that falls in the category of that CVE? So one example of that might be, actually, let's take our macro Office example again, because I think plays well for this, which is if you look at how many CVEs are tied to malicious Office macros, you'll find quite a few. And so if your defensive system is capable of catching and responding to all of the, popular variations of macros that are found in the wild, especially ones like MSF Venom and other things that can be dropped in into the VBA scripts, then you start to say, hey, I'm actually getting some pretty good confidence that my defense can protect against this particular type of attack, which means that I feel pretty good about my coverage across, n number of CVEs and the vulnerability space or surface area of this given endpoint.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so on the topic of these tests, I think something that's interesting is how you decide to build and prioritize the tests that you guys build. Because again, it seems like talking about the cat and mouse game of evasions and things like that. All these different ways you can evade defenses and controls. How do you guys? So I guess a two-part question. How do you guys decide on what to build? Are you constantly looking at like some of the reports that come out from researchers, researching different attacker TTPs and stuff like that? Do you go look at the attack matrix? Because I think clearly that's one of those things where, I think for years what we've needed is like a heat map of the attack matrix, because like all those tests aren't important. Like there are some companies who want to test for every single item on there, but clearly some of those are more important than others. So how do you prioritize that? And then the other side of that, I think one of the tricky things in security is the idea of what I like to call red flags versus yellow flags. Things that are absolutely bad 100% of the time. It should always float to the top. You should always see this alert, versus things that are, maybe they're bad. And because we have so many of those, and I call those yellow flags, we have so many of those yellow flags, it's very easy to bury all your red flags, all your absolute super important tests in a bunch of maybe kind of important, given the context tests.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a question that could be kind of fun here. So could be fun, right? Is a MacBook Air or an iPad, which one is more secure?
I would say the iPad is more secure, because less opportunities for the user to act independently and grab software that's not from a tightly controlled.
Absolutely. So totally. So I'd say that is the delta that we are looking at this from just a very qualitative standpoint. So I was actually on the MITRE ATT&CK leadership team, for those that don't know, when I was on the Caldera project. And so I spent a lot of time around the matrix and kind of seeing the pros and cons there, and how does that apply to things like, the matrix, along with things like behavioral analysis and so forth. Really, really fascinating ways of classifying things. But you come up with that same problem in purple teaming, which is you've got this giant matrix. How do you decide what to do? And is something like an impact tactic more or less important than a lateral movement tactic? And that is such a contextual decision that it becomes very difficult for somebody to prioritize. Similar CVEs. How do I know this one is better than that one, for me in particular? So the way we look at it is a little bit more surface area related. So if you look at the MacBook versus an iPad, and you say, well, yeah, iPads are actually more secure than MacBooks because the user is not allowed to do certain actions. So that delta between these two is actually a really good way to think about how you should prioritize your tests, which is what are those things in particular that you can't do on the iPad? So you can't dump LSASS, right? So that's the thing. You can do that on the Windows computer in this case. So that's an area that we'd want to target. You can install things outside of the App Store on the iPad. So when you look at that on the MacBook, you say, well, the user is allowed to install things. What are the types of tests that I need to write and run continuously around execution of or installation of executables? And so when you start to think in those sort of ways, you start to build boxes or constraints around what you want to do. And then you can very quickly create a priority around what is important to you. Tests around installation of things, or people touching processes on the box. What are those deltas between secure devices, in quotes, and insecure devices?
I feel like it was kind of a trick question, because the perennial answer to that question wasn't an option, and it's always Windows, right?
Yeah, exactly. The safest possible option that you could get.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So and you've got some acronyms around this as well. So, part of my question, I was trying to queue up VSTs. So if you want to explain what the concept of verified security tests are, because I feel like that second part of my question, like tests that are, much more reliable, 100%, versus ones or ones that are focused on things that are more likely to happen. Help me understand. Maybe I don't fully understand the concept of verified security tests.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So in development in red teams and purple teams, you're used to building something called the TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Really, that refers to the procedure level. So if you look at the attack matrix, you've got tactics and techniques. And what you're doing as a red teamer or purple teamer is you're building procedures or implementations of those techniques. And that's how you approach things. And so you've got the structure of the attack framework itself. And that's kind of where the structure falls off. That's what you have, which means that as a purple teamer, if I want to write a security test that is on the attack matrix, I can write it in any language I want. I can write it in any format I want. That test has no constraints to it. The test I write could be wildly different from a test that somebody at another company or even within my own company writes. And so this is where it becomes a little bit of the wild, wild west in offensive security, where everybody's writing TTPs their own way with their own intentions. And in a lot of ways, they are not safe to run in production for those reasons. There's no way to validate them. And so that's common in command and control products, including our own Prelude operator. When we were getting ready to release our current product, which is called Build, that product is designed around the concept of VST, Verified Security Test. We wanted to develop a structure that allows you to take the power of a TTP, validating defenses, and enable it to run in production. So the VST is really, if you want to think about it as a production-ready TTP, that's probably a pretty good way to think about it. And so a VST is a structured piece of code that contains a test function and a cleanup function. And the test function does an action in, take any of our examples like dumping LSAS, and then the cleanup function will reverse any effects, if there were any, in the test function. Now, this VST goes through a very strict compiling process, testing process, and ultimately gets stored as a compiled file in your own file store just for you. And that file is now something that has kind of gone through all of your different safety checks, which include the efficacy of the file itself, the test, as well as how many system resources does this test use, how long does it take to run, and so forth. And then that test is now almost like a golden image of the behavior that you want to test against. That VST enables you to move your security testing outside of development environments or security environments and allows you to run these tests that have never really run at production and scale on as many devices as you want. So if you want to understand whether you can, whether your defense can pick up a Office macro on 10,000 machines, you can run that single VST on all 10,000 and record which ones got it and which ones did not.
Yeah, you can definitely, scaling it up, I think it is a big thing. Even if you're only doing this testing on a portion of your computers, I feel like the value is huge here. And one of the things I always thought, I wonder if you get a lot of requests for this for customers or if you put these together for customers, but when we have a breach that gets in the headlines, inevitably somebody's going to ask, what would happen if we were hit with this thing that just happened to somebody else? And provided there's enough details, is that something you get a lot of requests for, like putting together like the chain of tests that would closely simulate, that headline breach?
Absolutely. This is where the rules actually come into place. So if you look at a lot of attacks out there, they can fall under different rules that are things that are known. So if a breach happens, yesterday or happened yesterday, and it is CVE ABC, right? Doesn't really matter the category, but you can look at that CVE and say, well, what are the behaviors of this CVE that make it unique? And then what rule does that CVE actually fall under? Could that be something related to ransomware? Well, do I have a rule that tests ransomware? Now, if you have a rule that's already testing ransomware, and that is a very comprehensive test, then that ransomware attack itself, even though the CVE is new, you have a comprehensive set of tests that you're already running. So it gives you the ability to have confidence in what your defense will actually respond like before that attack actually happens. Now, after you learn about the attack, you may see a variation in it that is unique, and you can write a new test implementation that closely mirrors what occurred there and add it to your collection of ransomware tests that you're running at whatever schedule.
Awesome stuff. I think that's all we have time for, but I did, before we wrap, want to mention that you do have a community edition of Prelude that people can download and try out for free and use for free. Anything else you want to mention there before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So Build itself, which is an IDE for writing verified security tests, that is a completely open source project. You find that on GitHub, of course, fully open source, and we're hoping that is actually a helpful thing to red teamers and purple teamers, pen testers, anybody that is involved in writing TDPs that is interested in trying to move them into production. We hope it helps the community.
Awesome stuff. David, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you very much.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk InfoSec culture and Mastodon with Jerry Bell. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. The shift to remote. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, which include YouTube and Twitch. And we're playing around with some others. I don't know how that's going. We were testing out Twitter and LinkedIn and I don't know, Instagram. Like you can stream in a bunch of different places now. All right, so for our second interview today, Jerry Bell joins us to talk about Infosec Community Culture and the migration to Mastodon, which has been big, somewhat contentious news over the last couple of months. Jerry has worked in IT for 30 years, doing everything from writing code to racking servers, and is currently the VP and CISO of IBM Public Cloud. Jerry has hosted the Defensive Security podcast, which I listened to a lot back in the past. That was one of my regular podcasts on my podcast list every week, and he best known currently in the last couple of months for running the Infosec.Exchange Mastodon instance for the past 6 years, which recently saw a slight bump in popularity. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You know, this is something, I think when we talked to prep for this, I mentioned back in 2015, I'd been on Twitter for a little while. Twitter is kind of how I got into Infosec. I remember, if you know Dave Shackelford, he was my boss back when I was a pen tester, and he encouraged me to get out, go to conferences, give talks, and get involved with the community. And one of the things he suggested, in addition to putting together a blog and writing blogs, was getting on Twitter. And that's how I met a bunch of people in the industry. In fact, I've had decade-plus long relationships with folks on Twitter. And sadly, some of them have passed away, and I never got to meet them in person. So it's kind of it's an interesting medium, to talk to people over and things like that. And I found it kind of fascinating how easy it was to make that migration and how quickly folks jumped over. So, just kind of want to get so you've been running this a lot longer than this big, when this big wave happened. Was that correct? 6 years you've been running this Mastodon instance?
It'll be 6 years in April. That's right. So, probably 6.5, 7 years ago, Mastodon and the Fediverse came onto my radar, and I'm someone who likes to tinker with things. And so I set up an instance, registered a domain, And for 5.5 years, it was pretty much just a little side experiment that had a couple hundred people in total. Maybe a handful of people on any given day until October.
Yeah. And I think you picked a great name. It's with real estate, it's location. And I think Infosec.Exchange is a really easy one to remember. So I think you nailed it there. But yeah, I mean, what was it? What was it like those first couple of weeks? Like, did you have to upgrade the hardware almost immediately, or how did all that go?
It was pretty exciting. So back in the spring of 2022, gosh, an entire year ago, when there was some some rumblings about Twitter potentially being taken over, there was a bit of a pop in accounts on Infosec.Exchange, and up until that point, I had been running the instance on a VPS, and it had worked pretty well. I spent a couple $100 a year for the 5 years up until that point, and so that was a bit of a wake up call. And I actually rented a pretty substantial server that I never thought I would actually grow out of. It was a 16-core server with NVMe drives, and it was pretty beefy server for what effectively had 10 or 20 people on it per day. Round about October 27th, 26th, 27th, 28th, going into that weekend, I was actually working down at the beach, and my phone started going nuts. I have my alerts set on Twitter, and didn't think a whole lot of it. I knew that there was stuff going on until I looked at it, and I saw lots and lots of people talking about joining Infosec.Exchange, talking about it and whatnot. And so I jumped over there, and sure enough, several hundred people had come in, and I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. And over the next 3 or 4 days, there were probably 500, 600, 700 people per day coming over, and then it really, which was pretty interesting, and then it started to really accelerate to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people per day, and
per day. Wow.
Per day. And at that point, I started to panic a little bit because not only did moderation become a much bigger challenge, but also it was pretty apparent that my once forever server was not going to cut it anymore. And so I ended up standing up a moderation team who to this day is just an absolute godsend, phenomenal group of people with the patience of saints. And then I spent a bunch of time scaling out the instance, both from the perspective of capacity, but also trying to get the costs under control, because I had been paying for it out of my own pocket until I got the bright idea to really go ask for some financial help, and so that the community did come together and help me out with that.
Yeah, it's and I think that's interesting that not only did you have to technically scale the instance you were running, but also staff it as well, and it's so what's that like the doing that moderation work, is that like when people flag things on the server, like they have special roles where they get like a queue of stuff that needs to be looked at and handled? What is that role like?
It's not unlike on Twitter. If you're familiar with Twitter and somebody says something offensive or post a thread or what have you, we have the same kind of reporting facility in Mastodon or the Fediverse. So you can report somebody who's a spammer or posting something obscene or illegal or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so it's a myriad of different things. it ranges from, misinformation about vaccines all the way to death threats and spam and herbal remedies and everything in between.
That's actually one of the things that. So I still pop over to Twitter because there's some people that I communicate with that haven't made the switch. So it's, but I find that interesting because that's one of the things that definitely drove me to use Infosec.Exchange a lot more. Is around the same time that this move started happening, I just started, that first huge round of layoffs that they did at Twitter. I just started getting crypto spam, like mentions spam. Like my mentions would just fill up with, buy this, buy that, new coin or join a game or a crypto game or whatever, a dozen or more a day, every day, and it's still continuing. And for a couple of weeks, I was reporting every single one, and I just gave up. I just I don't need a side job, just reporting mentions and stuff like that. So I don't know if that's just a scale thing for them, but I never had that problem before. But I wonder how many people moved over to Mastodon, because politically, the things that were happening around Twitter, or they had already not been enjoying Twitter for a while and didn't need much of a push to go to something else. Because I agree with a lot of people that it definitely feels like earlier days of Twitter, but I wonder if that's just because the community's smaller and the chances of your, whatever you post just getting lost in the noise is much less, on a platform with, 30, 40,000 people versus millions.
I think it's all of those things. There is the network effect is a real thing, right? And so there were certainly a nucleus of people that moved over in the early days, and some of the reasons they moved over ranged from, they just really are offended by Elon Musk's politics to they're afraid of they just don't want to see the spam. like what you pointed out, or many other reasons. But once that migration started, and your opening comments, by the way, I think hit it right on. It's actually about the community. It's not so much about the platform. I found personally, Twitter was just a phenomenal tool, right? I met so many great people over the years that I never would have had an opportunity to connect with, to share ideas with, to learn from. And so the thing that I've learned in the past couple of months in particular is it's less about the actual platform and more about the community. And the community has, in large part, picked up and moved over. But again, the reality is Twitter is a huge, very, very large environment. And in Infosec.Exchange, I think we just passed 45,000 accounts, which is, fairly big number. But I think Twitter is 500 million. So many orders of magnitude larger.
Yeah, I remember I did some research back in 2015 because I wanted to understand, what the size of Infosec or Infosec Twitter back in 2015 versus all of Infosec, because we knew it was a bubble, we knew it wasn't everybody. And back then, through my research, the number I came up with was 8%. That 8% of people in Infosec were on Twitter, which actually seems pretty remarkable. Obviously Infosec has grown a lot, since 2015. So I don't know if, the numbers of people using it pseudo professionally to talk about security stuff, cybersecurity stuff, hacking, things like that, is still up there. But and obviously that there's a lot of shades of Infosec, right? There's a lot of people that consider themselves hackers and do security research and stuff like that, but aren't security professionals, right? So it's kind of hard to do that kind of research. But but yeah, it seemed like what's I always said when all these new social networks came up, like the features don't matter as much as where the people are. As soon as the people move, as soon as you have that tipping point, that momentum where the people you enjoy bouncing questions off of and discussing things with have moved over. If that's where they're spending their time, if that's where they're posting, and you enjoy reading their stuff and conversing with them, like that's it. Like it doesn't matter if Mastodon's better than Twitter, or Twitter gets better. Like it's where the people are.
Absolutely. There are some, I will tell you, there are some features that I commonly hear, as being problematic, like the fact that we don't have the equivalent of a quote tweet. And
quote tweets, yeah.
I think that is something that will likely get fixed. Search is something that is, fairly inhibited. And by the way, one of the I've written about this or posted about this quite a bit over the course of the past couple of months. Mastodon isn't Twitter. It in some ways feels a lot like Twitter. It has similar purposes, but has a different lineage. The driving factors behind it, getting to where it is today, are different. It's a different community that built it up. The values that the people had who have created it are different than what you saw with with Twitter. Twitter was a commercial enterprise that valued engagement and growth and time on the site and whatnot, and that drove certain features and capabilities. And for me personally, I think it was kind of bad for my blood pressure because it seemed like Twitter was always putting stuff in front of me that it knew I would disagree with and would
It became the media, the mainstream media, basically, right? If it bleeds, it leads.
And on the other side, with Mastodon and the Fediverse in general, is more intended to be a community, and it doesn't have the concept of investors and advertisers and whatnot. It's about the people, and so some of the features that we had come to rely on Twitter, were and to some extent still are viewed as, potentially enabling bad behavior, like abusive behavior, targeting, and things like that. And to some extent, I think that is, a valid concern. To another extent, I think it is inhibiting valuable use of the tool, but that comes down to moderation, right? Like the fact that that you have quote tweets doesn't, that just means that as a moderator, like we have more responsibility to make sure that people are not acting irresponsibly, I guess is how I'm viewing that.
Yeah, I remember reading that quote tweets weren't there by design, because they were. And I think that's when I realized I used Twitter very differently from how some other people were using it, and I had to do some reading and some looking around to see like what does bad use of quote tweets look like? Because today I did a quote tweet on Twitter because we sent out we were promoting today's show. We were promoting, some of the interviews and the stuff on today's show from the Security Weekly account. And, a common way that I'll use a quote tweet is I'll hit quote tweet on that, and I'll, say why I'm looking forward to this interview, and I'll send that on to my followers. So I'm just, taking this promotion and adding some commentary on it. So it took me a bit to understand like what is misuse of quote tweets look like. And the other thing that kind of horrified me was the idea of, like somebody was really excited. They found a tool that would delete their tweets, any tweets that are older than a week, which the way I use Twitter, like that was horrifying to me. Like I treasure these conversations that I had, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and sometimes I go back and I use those in talks and, because people, there's some great quotes on Twitter. There's some great conversations that happened, and I find it really useful to go back and look at what we were talking about back then, and how that informed what we're doing today. As commentary on it looks like some of these predictions were right. So it's I look at it and use it, I think, a lot different than maybe some other people do, is a conclusion I came to.
Yeah. For me personally, I've been a little disappointed, not surprised, I guess, but disappointed and frustrated, because I had the same thing. Like, I've had so many productive and enlightening discussions on Twitter. What the most recent example was related to GDPR. When the GDPR was coming online, I had a bunch of discussions online with attorneys and actually regulators and other people on Twitter, and those are all gone. So, like, I can see things that I posted, but the other side of those are gone too, and that's unfortunate. But at the same time, on in Twitter, you actually had to go and find a third-party thing to do that. On Mastodon, that's actually like a native capability that a platform offers.
What is that? That's a native ability?
Ability to purge posts after a certain period of time.
Yeah, disappearing messages, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same concept as that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so another thing that's interesting, I think, is Twitter had absolutely turned into, a platform that, marketing folks use, that companies use. There's a lot of marketing automation platforms, where you can schedule tweets and you can have a whole digital marketing team managing messaging that they're sending out. A tool that'll, you put together your message and it's going to send it to LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, a bunch all at once. And I've noticed a lot of those tools don't support Mastodon, but I have started seeing some of those companies coming over to Mastodon. So we're seeing some of those use cases, some of those non-human accounts that represent either organizations, whether they're nonprofits or their projects or their, bots, the ones that spit out funny stuff. I think there's a whole Mastodon server I saw that's nothing but bots. What is it?
It's called Bots in Space.
Bots in Space. That's great. So it's I don't know what is I guess where I'm driving is what does the future look like? Does the Fediverse, and one of the nice features, I think, is you don't have to look at the Fediverse. You can look at only your local stuff, which I think will somewhat insulate from some of the downsides of just scale and growth, and the noise that can result from that. But where do you stand on like companies creating accounts, being automated or non-human accounts in general, and whether those should be allowed or should there be limits on them? Yeah, I haven't looked at the rules in a while. I don't know if you have rules specific for your instance, just for non-human accounts or shared accounts.
You're starting to get into the the philosophy of the Fediverse and some of the nuances that and challenges I think that lie ahead for us are when different instances have materially different values. And so if instance A allows corporate type accounts and instance B finds those to be terribly offensive, then they're probably going to end up blocking each other. And so it goes. For me personally, we do have a no spam rule. We do have quite a few corporate and non-person type accounts, and fortunately, a lot of them have actually approached me beforehand and asked for my permission, I guess. And the thing that I always tell them is it's not a marketing platform, right? You're welcome to be here. You have to follow the rules. And the expectation is that you're contributing to the discussion, right? So if you want to post about some cool research that you've done, or a learning blog that you've posted, or a video, fine. But it just like gratuitous spam is not welcome.
So, follow-up question on that. Thanks for being on here. Is one of the more amusing parts of Twitter for me are definitely the brand accounts, especially the humorous ones like Wendy's. I understand your approach and take on that as contributing to the conversation, but how do you personally feel about these sort of brand accounts potentially being on Mastodon, and how do you think Mastodon and different instances might stand on these brand accounts?
It's a really good question. I don't know how the Fediverse would react to Wendy's to be
the spicy takes.
Part of me thinks that it actually might go relatively well. Again, because it's novel, right? We see there are some novel commercial accounts, like I'm drawing a blank on the weather app. Well, there's a weather app that has post offensive messages to you in the weather, right? Well, they have an account, and so I think it depends, right? I don't know that it's a black and white thing to be candid. I think, as long as from my standpoint, as long as it's not obnoxious and gratuitous and like, if people don't want to see that, it's pretty easy to block, right? You can block an account really easily. You can actually block an entire instance also quite easily too. So again, if Wendy's joined Infosec.Exchange, I'm not sure what I would do. I'd maybe encourage them to go to a different instance. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I recently joined Infosec.Exchange thanks to a relatively famous non-horse, and am gradually dipping my toes into Mastodon. What do you suggest for those who are just starting with a new Mastodon account, especially those that are switching over from Twitter?
Number one is, I wouldn't recommend going to one of the really big instances, like Mastodon.social. I think there's a lot of fear of missing out by not being on a super large instance. They have about 1 million accounts. The challenge with them is they have a lot of, look, anytime you have 1 million people, you get a lot of noise. And so they have all sorts of both performance problems and moderation challenges. And not that, by the way, that they do any sort of a bad job. They're actually a phenomenal group of people. Sometimes I'm not sure that's the best first place for people to be. I would say, find an instance that aligns with your interests, right? There's interests just like Infosec.Exchange is somewhat Infosec focused, although like we don't have a rule that says you only can talk about Infosec stuff. Like, I post plenty of cat and dog pictures and talk about politics and personal stuff, probably 10 times more than I do about security stuff. But there are other instances that deal with niches like crafts. There's photography ones, there's knitting ones, there's medical instances, there's legal instances, there's news instances. So finding one that that is a bit active, because if you join one that is pretty sparsely populated, you're probably not going to get a lot of interaction, and I think you'll get the wrong impression. If you find one that aligns with your interests, I think you'll have the best time, because your local timeline will be filled with people who you probably find interesting, talking about things that you do find interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Got to find your people.
Got to find your people. Now, but having said that, right, like regardless of where you end up, unless two instances have ended up blocking each other, you can, it's kind of like email, right? You can talk to anybody in the Fediverse. You can follow them. You can communicate back and forth. It's just, if you pick an instance that interests you, you're going to see like all of the content that is posted to that instance, whereas you might not see it unless you're actually actively following people.
That's interesting. So I have a question that I've been curious about. When you created an instance and kind of connected it to the Fediverse, are you granted special powers within Mastodon? Are you able to see how many instances there are, or see the whole Fediverse and kind of like the Watcher in the Marvel universe?
That's a great question.
So, I think the answer is yeah. I don't mean to evade the question at all. The answer is certainly yes. Like all that stuff exists in a database that I have access to. But on the other end, if you go to fediverse.observer, you can see it too. It's a pretty open protocol, and there's lots of sites online that actually do track that stuff.
Yeah. So, I don't know if Katie, if you or Tyler have any questions, but yeah, for me, I'm still dancing between the two. I go check Twitter every now and then, but it's mostly just checking it, because some people I've been communicating with over DMs there for years. I've got my Mastodon account, in my name. I guess that's okay. I guess that's still legal over there on Twitter, so people can clearly figure out how to find me over in Mastodon. But certainly the conversations I'm having are almost 100% on Mastodon these days. So it's for me, I mentioned I use it a little bit differently. I was an industry analyst, so I spent all day, every day, just thinking about InfoSec's like bigger problems, how to solve them, that kind of stuff. And it was just an invaluable tool for me to be able to go to this network that I had on Twitter and pose a question, or get somebody's take on something, or do like a quick survey or something like that. Oftentimes in just like an hour or a couple hours or something like that, I could have these great insights on something I was brainstorming about. And yeah, it seems to be fully over into Mastodon now. So it's I found it interesting how non-sticky, people in like product management talk a lot about the stickiness of a product and how you make a product sticky. And it's all those features are just weren't all that important, it seems. It's where the conversation's at. So I'm starting to repeat myself here.
Well, we'll see what the long term holds. I obviously we don't know where Twitter will go. I mean, they could turn the corner and release some new super Uber feature, and everybody runs back to them, or they could turn their corporate headquarters into a Spirit Halloween. Like we don't know where their trajectory is, but we do know that in the past, the likes of MySpace and Dig and Slashdot, like those things fell apart fast, and so part of me wonders if that's what's going on. For my part, I thought that the community that had formed in Twitter was like something that was super valuable, and I feared losing that, and not from a personal standpoint, but from like the good of the world standpoint. And I had this place, and I wanted to at least offer it up as a soft landing spot. From my perspective, there's a bunch of really great security instances on the Fediverse. I have one of probably 2 or 3 dozen different security focused instances that are out there. but from my perspective, I view myself as kind of the front door. So a lot of people have been kind of piling into the instance from Twitter, and then they move on. Some of them create their own personal instance, some move on to others, some stay, and that's all great.
And that is one aspect of it I really like, is that we can all still talk together, but Mastodon, like proper, like Germany Mastodon, can't enforce new features on you. Like you're not even running vanilla Mastodon on this instance. So ultimately you have a lot of control over what new features to adopt or not adopt, right?
That's right. So we run a fork, and probably soon going to run a fork of that fork with some extra patches on top of the fork of the fork, because that's just the nature of the beast, right? The core Mastodon software is great, but it has certain limitations, like it doesn't allow longer posts. And one of the things that people are both enthralled and alarmed by when you first join Infosec.
I was shocked. I was shocked. I was like, there's being generous, and then there's just ridiculous. Come on, Jerry, what are you doing?
That was the product of a battle with another instance owner. We kept raising
one-upping each other,
and then eventually we lost interest in it, and here we are. But there's other things like the ability to include rich text or markdown. There's various other features that the fork gives. I'm trying to improve the ability to search posts on the instance, and there's now a fork of the fork that provides the quote tweet functionality, and so I'm in the process of that. So, but yeah, is
that going to be contentious and divisive? You think adding in quote tweets?
Probably, but being contentious and divisive is not new to me now. I don't relish controversy or conflict, but holy moly, has it found me since I've been there.
Yeah, I think, people used to say that on Twitter too. Like once you pass a certain number of followers, like things change all of a sudden. You start getting pushed back on stuff. You start getting challenged a lot more. And like you mentioned, there's a couple dozen Infosec servers out there. People have gone and started their own. So I'm glad you have that attitude towards it, because I'd much rather you be, divisive about, what you're going to do with it than constantly on the fence and, swaying back and forth and stuff like that. And so far I'm pretty happy with it. So I can't complain.
Good. That makes me happy.
I'm really curious about the software forking and different instances running kind of their own almost unique versions of Mastodon. So if you implemented quote tweeting, how would that be seen by the Fediverse, or would that be interpreted?
So it's a great question. I'll give you a couple of examples. So like with the rich text formatting that the glitch fork provides, in a non-glitch instance, you'll just see the formatting characters. Like, so for a bold, you'll see the 2 stars before and after, and so it's it isn't like totally scrambled. In the case of the quote tweets, it quite literally is just you have your message and then a link to the quoted tweet. And so if you're on an instance that doesn't support the quote tweets, it looks like just a message with a link to a post.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. But right. I mean, look, one of the challenges that I think we have to be cognizant of is that we have to not do the historical, not the current Microsoft thing, but the historic Microsoft thing of, embrace and extend in ways that nobody else supports.
Right. Yeah. I wonder about the, I guess Markdown doesn't look too terrible if you're on an instance that doesn't support Markdown. But honestly, that's been really my only frustration so far, is finding a Markdown guide. Like I every now and then I search for it, and it's like, oh, we support Markdown as supported by so-and-so. And I go over and I look at that, and I just can't find a guide anywhere, because it seems to be different from the Markdown that I use in Notion, which is different from the Markdown that I use in like GitHub and GitLab. Like there's so many flavors of Markdown. That's my only frustration so far, is finding a guide.
It's very limited. I'll ping you one afterwards.
Okay. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on here and answer all our stupid questions about the Fediverse, which is so far vastly superior to the Metaverse, I must say. But thank you, Jerry.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And you spent much less than Facebook on it, too.
Quite a bit less, yes.
All right. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news. managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. And clips are my favorite. We've got so many great clips in the show. I mean, if you try and listen to the show all together, it's really long. So I love the idea of pulling out clips for people to enjoy, because we've had some great moments in here. You know, they're 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes long, and it's I'm happy we're starting to pull those out and share those. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news, which anytime we take off for a few weeks, we end up with a lot of news piled up, and today is no different. A surprising amount of news came out around the holidays. Some of it was not planned. We've got some breaches on the list here, and some of it was. So we're not going to cover everything. There's 38 stories here. You can go to securityweekly.com/ESW301 if you want to check out all the stories that we've shared today. But we've got, really it's 8 funding items here. And the first one, A16Z, for some reason, threw $100 million at another crypto startup. And this one is encrypting stuff they're putting on Ethereum. So that's how it found its way into my security feed. And typically, I'll just filter these out, we'll cover Web3 stuff if there's anything really security related. But I threw this one in because 100 million's big for a Series B. And I wanted to discuss to see if anybody had some insight into what otherwise just looks like an encrypted read-only database. Like why is that worth $100 million? I don't know.
Wow.
Old man shouting at cloud status here. I'm achieving.
Yeah. My first gut was like, holy smokes, are they still investing in crypto? But then after this whole FTX thing, I was like, gosh, they're still putting money to work at crypto. Didn't all these institutionals learn from FTX? Yeah. But is it crypto or is it a blockchain tech, right? Those are two fundamentally different things when you think of investing.
It's indirect crypto, right? It's and they might be making that distinction now, where they might have shifted their funding policy and just going after blockchain stuff. But still, I think blockchain is probably one of the most disappointing technologies, or maybe I shouldn't say disappointing, just it is what it is. It was just most overhyped maybe of the last decade, technologies of the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be a direct function of just a earliness of the tech. It's only been around for a handful of years, which when you're talking about massively transformative tech, you got to let that stuff bake in the oven a long time generally before it massively transforms anything. Right? Yeah. Like think about when we first started talking about cloud compute and things like that. It's 15 years ago? I don't know the exact dates, but it's a long time ago. And we still barely cracked, a large percentage of companies using these technologies. And that's a massively transformative tech. So I wonder if, the tech's important. It's just super early.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was that Bitcoin hit and went up and up and up, and a lot of people felt like they missed that train earlier on. There's the joke about someone spending $100 on a pizza because they bought it with Bitcoin in the early days. I think a lot of it is this FOMO, this fear of missing out, that something crypto related, something that is part of the blockchain, it's they're going to miss what it is. And if they get in early, they throw some money at it, maybe they can ride that wave as they go forward with it. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with Web3 as well. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think one of the things that limited use cases for a blockchain was the fact that it was completely transparent. Anybody could grab a copy of it. So that limited your use cases, right? But, I haven't seen anything before now that would prevent you from encrypting at least part of the data that you put on there. So it's I feel like I have some very recent relevant insight into like how this might be used after investigating how both LastPass and 1Password selectively use encryption. Because I think part of my and we have both those stories, or the LastPass is a big chunk of the breach stories that we have on here today, and I think the assumption, like when you hear of these password management solutions talking about vaults, the metaphor of a vault doesn't work very well because everything inside the vault is protected equally. And that's just not how encryption is used for password managers. Like 1Password is a SQLite database, and the stuff that needs to be encrypted is encrypted. And the stuff that doesn't, like last date it was, or the date it was created, last date it was modified, last date it was used. So a lot of dates in there. And some other information isn't. And the big contentious thing with LastPass is they didn't encrypt the URL field, which going through my old LastPass stuff, I found a ton of secrets attached as parameters to URLs in that URL field. So that, I think it's interesting as we start talking about encryption on blockchain. So maybe it enables new use cases is my long-winded way of using the password manager example.
Well, as the old saying goes, encryption's easy, key management is hard. So if they figured out some novel approach to key management that it enables some sort of distributed control and secure capabilities around that, then maybe it could be interesting.
But is it quantum resistant?
The thing that's kind of neat here is like, if we're talking, definitely not quantum resistant. If we're talking about like the cool thing about Ethereum, when I was researching Ethereum, I did some investing in Ethereum early on. It's supposed to be a kind of like a digital contract, digital compute system, so that you can write code onto the Ethereum blockchain that gets executed.
Smart contracts,
right? Smart contract that gets executed, and more so than smart contracts, it's just not it is a contract, but it's also you can code on top of it, which makes it a blockchain compute engine. I mean, in theory, that is the coolest idea that I've heard in a long time. It's just maybe so freaking early that it's just, I don't know. As I read through this, I'm going, they're trying to realize exactly what Ethereum was trying to realize from day one, just in a better way, which is a great storyline. And storylines are how you get money sometimes.
And code
I
has
agree
mistakes.
with Ethereum.
So sorry, real quick, Sean. I was just going to say that there's a whole cottage industry of smart contract scanning tools. Looking for issues in your smart contract code. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, Ethereum is very cool. The whole smart contract and approach to leveraging the blockchain for not just a method of tracking what transactions occurred, but also to have some other elements where you can have some smart contract type capabilities. Very, very cool. But obviously, a lot of scammers have leveraged that in order to extract money out of people's wallets and do some interesting things. And I think a scanner is a fascinating way to do it. I think that when you have a system or a solution or a technology that provides amazing capability, certainly there's going to be some the kind of underground part of that as well. It's going to be interesting to see how blockchain actually progresses. One of the biggest limitations that I'm aware of with blockchain is just transactions per second. Like they are severely limiting to the point where you just can't realistically transact at an approach that a business or approach a business level, a business level of what would be required in order to have transactions that would meaningfully run a business. So that part of it is always the interesting thing to me.
So, and that's a really important point for a couple of reasons. And I think that is an issue with some of the earlier blockchains, but I've heard some were created specifically to address the transactional issue. But I think with Bitcoin, I don't know if it's still this way. There's some proposals to fix this somehow, but I think it was 7 transactions a second globally, like was the fastest you could add stuff to, to the Bitcoin blockchain. But even if they fix that, the other issue I saw with a lot of use cases for Ethereum is that there was still a gas fee, because it was wrapped around currency. Like a lot of these use cases just wouldn't work if it cost you $80 a record to add a record to that blockchain, to add a record to that database. Like that prices you out of a whole bunch of stuff. Like, and that was before the market downturn. I think it was like $80 to $100 if you wanted to mint an NFT. And I think the vast majority of NFTs people were minting were worth vastly less than $80 to $100.
I was going to say NFT was definitely where people started hearing about gas fees, certainly where I did. You mentioned about 7 transactions a second. MasterCard's network is estimated to run at about 5,000 transactions per second. So obviously it's an order of magnitude difference between the two. And I don't know if that's a solvable problem until you get to quantum computing.
Yeah, the credit card processor I joined in 2001 was my first big career salary job back when I was a young man. We did 4.5 million transactions a day. So I don't know what that comes out to in transactions per second, but yeah, it's a lot more than 7 per second, right?
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Let's see. Honestly, I didn't have time to look into a lot of these. I am aware of VMRay. I think that's like a malware detection and analysis tool. Yeah. So that's interesting seeing them get funding. I've not seen malware analysis and detection last decade were huge. FireEye, it had all these companies selling appliances that would do it on-prem for you. They take malware that had never been seen before and analyze it for you. And obviously, it's still an important tool, I think, for some people on the enterprise side. But I don't know, Sean, if you have any insight on the relevance of malware analysis, the automated malware analysis these days. Do we need another Virus Total, or what's the other big one? I think it was a Korean tool, hybrid analysis.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges with what we've had as far as automated tools like Virus Total is it says, or at least what a lot of people expect, is that they upload a sample and it runs against a number of different antivirus type engines. However, the cloud components of those engines usually aren't captured as part of that. So it may say there's no detection on Virus Total for it, but when you actually run it against whatever that standard antivirus is, it uses the cloud component of that, and it detects that yes, this is actually malicious. I think the automated elements of scanning across a number of things that we're seeing in the industry is pretty interesting, especially around malware, because what is malware? It's something that's doing something that we don't want it to. There's ways to evade. There's ways to make it look like it's normal. Certainly, there's a lot of different techniques for malicious code to evade detection. One is to check to see if it's actually in a VM. Most people do not run code or run an application in a virtual machine. They're actually running it on their computer, which is typically a laptop. So if the malicious code can detect that it's in a VM or some sort of virtual container, it very often can identify that hey, this is being analyzed, and maybe I can just go ahead and show that it's not doing anything untoward that would be unexpected and should be normal. So I think that if there are some novel approaches to how to better detect malware and better extract what those elements are that are malicious, then sure, let's see what can be done here. I think there's room for improvement for sure.
Does anyone else hear the name Cybercube and think of the Borg, or is it just me?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, the name gave me pause for sure.
That's the name of their ships. Like if I were to just see the Borg, and need to come up with a name for their ships, I would go with Cybercube.
That's the biggest news on that fundraising. Not that they raised whatever they raised, $50 million for growth. What really matters on that news is the name of their company.
Yeah. And it looks like they're, I forget the acronym for this, but basically companies that cyber insurance vendors basically outsource, the job of determining, how much of a policy to approve, how to price the insurance policies. And it's my understanding that's kind of where CyberCube is at. They enable reinsurance placement is the terminology on their website. I'm trying to translate that. Underwriting decisions. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of these, and we've got more to talk about cyber insurance later. I think one of them is questioning whether or not cyber attacks can continue to be insurable if they continue at the current rate. And then another one is basically Ohio Supreme Court saying ransomware is not insurable under physical damage policy, which, I think most people are going to say, duh. It just, I think further shows that it's a challenge to get insurance to pay out on this stuff. And it's going to be more of a challenge in the future. I think there's going to be a lot more situations where, there's a catch to your policy where, they need to determine if it's, worth paying out, whether you were negligent or not, that kind of thing. So interesting to see how that goes.
We've had some experts on in the past, and they certainly know a lot more about cyber insurance than I do. But it seems to me, based on everything we've heard and all the research I've done and talking to people about their plans, first of all, this isn't atypical of the insurance industry, but that it's almost, insurance is supposed to be a CYA, right? But it's almost impossible in the majority of cases because technology, the digital ecoverse, cybersecurity is so complicated that there's always going to be a layered problem, a layered issue, a layered attack progression. And so there's always going to be a way that an insurance company can say, you did these 27 things, but the 28th one, that was where the problem was. And because this is not a very clear, it's not like a car accident. If somebody runs a red light or if somebody changes lanes without looking, like these are not straightforward types of events. And so there's always going to be something that gives an insurance company an opportunity to say, no, you don't qualify because you were negligent here. So that really makes me question the whole industry, really. Not cybersecurity, the cyber insurance
industry. Yeah. So I think this nicely dovetails into, let's see, number 22. So Rackspace, Sean, would you, if you were Rackspace's cyber insurance policyholder, would you pay out on that policy in their case?
Well, given that I've worked with cyber insurance companies in the past, I don't know that I can respond to that directly, but I will say that one of the things that could be a limiting factor for any insurance policy payment would be potential negligence. And that term has certain meaning in different areas. If a patch was released for a certain product, in the case of Exchange, it was released and it was determined that was the result or that was the reason why the Rackspace Exchange environment was breached, then that could be something that could make that a situation where a cyber insurance provider might say, no, we're not going to pay on this because you didn't do your due diligence or didn't do what most people would feel was appropriate. Now, Kevin Beaumont's post on Mastodon has a ton of information that he has broken down as he's done in the past on many other topics around Exchange, and he's been focused on Exchange security for a number of years and highlighting issues with Exchange configurations. I used to run an Exchange and Exchange servers before, including one personally at home, which I stopped a long time ago, thankfully. Exchange is very difficult to get right. It's been around for a very long time. I remember working with Exchange 4 4.0. And a lot of things that Exchange servers need in order to process email and to operate correctly is internet access, which means that you have to have a connectivity into your Exchange server, not just for SMTP for your standard Exchange interactivity or email interactivity, but also the Exchange components. So you're talking about Outlook Web Access, you're talking about other components such as the mobile accessibility. So all of these add pathways for attackers to connect in, and certainly if there's a known vulnerability, that's a significant issue. A number of the Exchange vulnerabilities that have come out over the past 2 or 3 years are things that were active in the wild. I've said before that if you're running an Exchange server, that you probably really should be looking at a hosted provider. At this point, Rackspace themselves has shifted everything over to Microsoft 365.
Yeah, they shut it down. It was so bad they shut the whole thing down.
Yeah. So when you get to the point where even a hosted provider feels like Exchange is best hosted and run by the vendor Microsoft, then this is definitely a gut check for 2023 for anyone who still has on-prem Exchange servers, because it is difficult to secure. And then you have the whole situation where you have hybrid, where you have Exchange servers on-prem that have mailboxes as well as those that are in Microsoft 365 as well. So yeah, it's not an easy thing, and running Exchange, securing Exchange is a big challenge, and there's a number of ways to compromise Active Directory by compromising Exchange. So the whole thing ties together and results in a very bad day for folks who are not actively patching and ensuring Exchange is updated.
Yeah, it was a breathtaking breach. I mean, just the scale of it, and it's interesting because the scale of Rackspace is pretty big. This is a $3 billion revenue company, so not quite as big as most of the big public cloud players. But their hosted Exchange product was only 1% of their $30 billion revenue. They said around in their 8K, they said around $30 million per year was what they made there. But the number of customers, we don't have an exact number, but it's either thousands or tens of thousands. And to give you an idea of the scale of small and medium-sized businesses that were running hosted Exchange with Rackspace, Rackspace hired 1,000 people just to handle the support requests between December 2nd and I guess still maybe today. They say they've gotten 3/4 of their customers moved over to Microsoft 365, and they have recovered. I don't know if they've said how much of the data they've recovered, but it looks like they're on track to recover most of the hosted Exchange data. Basically, their CrowdStrike came in and helped them clean up each of those hosted Exchange servers, and they're bringing them carefully online one at a time, extracting all the mail data as a PST, handing that off to customers so that they can then import it into Microsoft 365. But yeah, so on the one hand, I've got to say, very impressive how they handled it. You know, it's a company that has always referred to their own support as fanatical. You know, so they had no choice but to throw everything they had and more into responding to this and taking care of customers. But at the same time, there's no word on whether the attackers exfiltrated any of that data.
So having worked breaches before, that's always where you get very cagey in language as far as what you admit to, what you agree to, what you say has actually occurred. Certainly, as CrowdStrike does their investigation and works on the incident response, more information will be forthcoming through Rackspace. It's a challenge when to communicate publicly what you've identified and how, as well as obviously what is the liability that, say, Rackspace might have in the situation, especially if they have local government customers, which Kevin in his post has pointed out that there's a number of local government customers that host their email on Rackspace, or at least have. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that Rackspace customers are going to start looking at is, okay, well, do we continue with Rackspace, or do we just directly switch over to Microsoft? At this point, I don't know that it matters if Rackspace is ultimately Rackspace email is ultimately being hosted by Microsoft 365. But yeah, it's it is an interesting situation because, as we've seen with the LastPass breach, there's information that has come out over time, and with really any breach, there's information that comes out over time. The first thing that's admitted is that there was a breach. They're evaluating and identifying what was actually what was affected as part of that. You start identifying, okay, what level of customer information was affected, because that's one category. If there's privacy information that was affected, or in Europe, if it's GDPR, how these things impact what the company needs to do and with their response times on certain things, because that matters also. A lot of companies have contractual obligations to respond and notify a customer if certain types of information was breached or exposed. It doesn't necessarily have to show that it was captured, exfiltrated, downloaded to an attacker, but was it exposed? And so there's different levels of responsibility that companies have depending on what space they're in. So Rackspace is certainly going to be going through that process with CrowdStrike to help them identify what was affected, what level of diligence do they need to do from this point forward. I do find it very interesting that they had termed the customer mailbox data that was hosted on Rackspace's legacy and is providing a PST file that can be downloaded for the customer. Migrating a lot of data takes time, and the easy button is really export to PST, because there's a native function for that as part of the old school migrations for Exchange. I remember migrating Exchange mail data from Exchange server to Exchange server, and it was a huge pain from an older system to a newer system. So absolutely, I understand why they would want to just export that to PST, provide it to the customers, and have them kind of do the work. But that really sucks going into January 2023, and now all of a sudden, as maybe the one IT support person has to then figure out how to download and import dozens, if not hundreds, of PSTs. That is not a fun day. So PST. I feel for them.
Yeah, how big are those PSTs?
They're going to be big, especially if the customers have had mailbox data in there for a while. I mean, I don't think you're too far off. There's going to be some that are very, very large.
Would that be a single PST per Exchange server, or certainly not per account on the Exchange server? That would be nuts in some cases.
It's per account, yeah. So each mailbox would have its own PST. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so that's a lot of PSTs. Some of those are going to be pretty big, especially with people that, I mean, after a while, once I think Gmail dropped the super large mailbox sizes, then everyone else was like, yeah, we'll do large mailboxes sizes. I remember when Gmail was first announced, and everyone's like, are you crazy? There's no way you can provide a gig mailbox. Like, that isn't just not possible. And Google's like, we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think it maxed at like 17 gigs, and then they were like, "Yeah, you need to delete some stuff. You don't need all this crap."
Right, because there are database limitations on the back end. I mean, Exchange has upped and increased those sizes over years. So yeah, there could be some that are gigabytes, multi-gigabytes to tens, if not hundreds of gigabytes. Downloading and importing those are going to be a real big pain, especially since they have to get downloaded from Rackspace and then ultimately uploaded into Microsoft Office 365 into that environment, assuming that the IT support personnel at each of these different companies that are customers of Rackspace even decide to do that. They may just provide the PST files in the user's home drives and say, here's how you can connect that to Outlook. Which is probably what I would do initially, and then figure out what the migration process would be, maybe even getting the last 6 months of email imported in. But yeah, it's not what you want to wake up to in the new year, unfortunately.
You know, when this breach began, when I first saw this announced, I went to Intermedia's website to see if they still did Exchange hosting, and they did, and it was there. Now when I go there, I don't see it on their website.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of hosting providers are looking at risk and looking at what the value is. I mean, as was said, this is 1% of their revenue, so obviously not that big of a deal to shift off of that. I mean, no, not at all. And I would probably predict that anyone else that's doing actual Exchange hosting is probably just going to shift over to M365 as well, because it's just not worth it at this point when you look at the price. like you're scraping for profit on it anyway because you're hosting your own
and
system.
Their stock got hammered, and they're I'm sure paying out the nose for CrowdStrike to come in and do all the stuff that they're doing, and it's just not worth it.
No. Breaches are very costly. They're very expensive, and it's not just the cost of the actual incident response company. It's the cost of your personnel. People get burnt out. They work 80, 120-hour weeks. They get burnt out quickly, and before you know it, you lose some of your best people. And then, of course, there's the brand and reputation issues behind that. So, yeah, it's not a good day for them, for their operations and support folks as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so speaking of breaches, LastPass is the other big one that actually happened last August, but it was December 22nd when LastPass updated the blog post, added an update to that blog post that they originally posted in August. That was very confusing to a lot of people. The blog post still said we recommend our customers take no action, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, they got all the data. They got all your vaults are gone. And it was unclear what was encrypted in those vaults and what wasn't. They didn't have like a distinct list. They just said, some stuff is encrypted, like, for example, and they listed a few examples, and didn't generate a whole lot of confidence, that blog post. And in fact, the way it was worded, a lot of folks through the holidays thought that it was saying that one type of notes field was encrypted and other types of note fields were not. And I think that's where most people put their backup codes. If they use 2FA and they're told to save their backup codes, I think most people just dump them into the notes field of that password entry. So a lot of people were saying, oh, crap, all my backup codes, you can bypass 2FA on all my accounts. And a lot of people spent the holidays resetting all their accounts, going one by one through hundreds of accounts that they had stored in LastPass and resetting those. But I spent some time actually downloading. I found a GitHub project that allowed you to pull your vault. It told you how to pull it out of the browser because it actually gets loaded into the browser. So you can actually download your entire password vault using DevTools in Chrome out of your browser, and then it gave you the ability to parse it into a CSV, either encrypted or you could choose to decrypt it if you gave it your master password. And I did that, and I compared both the encrypted and decrypted version, and it finally answered all my questions that the press release, that the blog post should have answered. So it seems like it's still going to be a theme in 2023. Same thing with Slack's press release over their breach that happened over the holidays, which was GitHub related, similar to Okta's GitHub related source code compromise. These press releases really aren't giving customers much confidence, I think, and they're not answering the questions they need to answer.
Yeah, and it's a black eye for the industry as well, because when you're looking at something as that should be secure, I mean, you said it earlier, Adrian, a vault is a vault. Like we're used to the physical representation of a vault. You put your money into that vault, you lock it, it's closed. Everything inside that vault is locked. So the concept of having some fields that are encrypted and other fields that aren't is very confusing and doesn't actually show that vault that vault approach is the right one, or is the right way to refer to it. And certainly LastPass having this issue affects all the others as well, because it erodes trust. People then start going, all right, well, maybe I should buy that notebook from Target or Walmart and just go ahead and start writing my passwords down in that and keep that right next to me, because that's more secure relatively than a vault that's stored in the cloud that potentially others could access. So yeah, it's not a good thing, and it's been tough enough getting people to even move to a password vault system where they are using better passwords because the system generates them or not. At this point, I'm just telling family members to go ahead and use the Apple vault that's built into the Apple products, because it's a little. First of all, it's integrated, and second of all, it just works. And the third point of it is Apple's pretty good at securing data, or at least hopefully is. But it all comes down to trust, just like all these things in cloud. We have to have some level of trust when it comes to these systems. And when that trust is eroded by something like Rackspace or something like LastPass, then it makes it more difficult. It makes it more difficult for people to be able to do the things that are going to help them with their security ultimately.
And I was just going to iterate what you said, Sean, about, it's been hard enough to move people to a password vault. I still know a lot of people who are not in security, not in tech, who don't even know what it is and think that the idea of a password vault is just so complicated and confusing, and when it's really just not. And I don't know how much this hit the mainstream. Probably not as much as it is in our minds, but it, like you said, again, it is a black eye on the industry on one hand, but on the other hand, if you're that giant target, obviously attackers are going to be trying to come after you. Doesn't make it any easier for those of us who have vaults, and we know that they can be compromised just as easily as anything else if proper measures aren't taken. But this sure doesn't go a long way for our credibility as security practitioners when we say, hey, use these security tools, and then the security tools themselves are breached, because in the mainstream it's still really hard to convince people that cybersecurity matters.
Yeah, and these are not just consumer tools or not just business tools. These are consumer tools as well. So, Pat, a lot of us have been spending years trying to talk family and friends into using password managers. And man, LastPass making us look bad.
Yeah, I even got my father to go on like the family plan and the upgraded plan. And, it's just hard because this is not the first password vault breach, right? It's hard to say with any credibility, hey, use this, you'll be better off. And then, oh, by the way, spend 40 hours updating all 3,000 of your passwords. Yeah,
I'm still working through mine. I hadn't touched it since 2018, 2019, maybe, because I worked for some companies that used it. So I ended up using it for some personal stuff as well, and some side projects. Like we used it for a little while for B-Sides Knoxville. And so I've got this mishmash of all this stuff that I've just got to one by one go through and clean up. And as I'm going, I'm looking at that URL field and saying, okay, can I take this string and log in? Because there's a lot of parameters that are just token equals, and it's like an OAuth token. Sometimes OAuth tokens never expire or don't expire for years. So it's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah, I can't believe they didn't encrypt that URL field.
That was something I was thinking.
I checked on that.
It was something I was thinking about when it was announced, I don't know, years ago when we found out LastPass didn't encrypt the URL field. And I thought the same thing, Adrian, that there's a lot of data that's passed through that. When my bank years and years ago, this is probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, started providing online access to the bank and the associated credit card with it, I started looking at the URLs and saw that it was passing the full credit card string in the URL. So things like that could definitely have been captured in that URL field. So not only do we need to change passwords, but we should be checking to see what actually was put into that URL field when we added the URL. I stopped putting URLs in it at all once I found out that it wasn't encrypted, just because I like pain when I'm trying to log into the site. But you're right. I did the same thing. I took those recovery pins and information and put that into the notes field because, of course, notes would be encrypted, right? And I think there's still some uncertainty on that. I think there's probably a 99.
Uncertainty. Just to clear that up, okay. I checked on that. There's only one notes field, and it is encrypted in LastPass. So the only, there's a couple other fields that are unencrypted, but the big one that's unencrypted for LastPass is the URL field. Everything else you would expect to be encrypted, the username field, the password field, the notes field, is all encrypted. So the idea of secure notes and notes that are part of other entry types is just branding product branding stuff. There is only one notes field, and any entry you have in LastPass that has a notes field goes in that same encrypted notes field. So just to clear that up for people listening, I spent a lot of time over the holidays verifying that manually by picking apart my vault.
Yeah. Well, there was a person posting on Twitter, and at the moment I forget who it was, who went through and did an entire breakdown of the entire LastPass situation over the Christmas break, and spent a lot of time evaluating notes are encrypted versus not. And it seemed like it was pretty certain that they were encrypted, but there wasn't a good answer on it. So I'm glad to hear that, yes, they are.
Yep.
And it's just so unfortunate that, as cybersecurity practitioners, the industry has spent years talking about compliance doesn't equal security. And yet when it comes to these breach announcements and these notifications, they're doing the minimum required by law to meet compliance. And so they are thereby not doing right by their customers.
Yeah, and it's just like the whole confusion around the secure notes thing, like that's part of my rant on press releases here, on breach press releases. I think a lot of these companies are just actively doing damage to their image by not being as transparent and as specific as they should be in these. And I understand these releases have a lot of, like public companies have to think about what they're required to say. They've got different audiences. They've got investors, board members, regulators reading these press releases. So they've got to say the right things for them. But I've seen plenty of companies have, like the generic public statement, and then they do a blog post and they're like, okay, here's the technical breakdown of what was compromised, what was exposed, and what wasn't. There's no reason you can't do that I'm aware of, at least. I've seen tons of companies do it right. So it's frustrating when these companies actually create more problems for themselves. Because I found I wasn't the only one, to read that press release or the blog post as, there's different types of notes field. One is encrypted, because they call one secure notes, and then there's just notes. So I assumed there were two notes fields. And no, they just implied that in their post and created more problems for themselves. So, yeah, same thing with Slack. Read Slack's latest one. Where they share some information, but they create more questions than they answer with their post. They say private code repositories were accessed by attackers, but they weren't like the Slack code repositories. So, you're left wondering, okay, what were they then? What was compromised? So, it seems like it would have been easy to answer all the questions ahead of time there. And it's just frustrating to me. I think they're creating more problems for themselves than they need to.
Yeah, and it seemed like, sorry, back to the LastPass thing, it seemed like a lot of the biggest issue with it is that if the strength of your password, your master password for LastPass is weak, then you have more of a problem, and it's more likely that your vault could be exposed. Whereas if you had a stronger master password, then probably you could be okay. And I think that's part of the other concern and challenge around the LastPass situation. Is that it could affect this person worse than this person, especially if they used an email address that's public or that's well known. It doesn't give a good feel for the people that have used it, and so that's why I think we're seeing a lot of people migrating off into 1Password or elsewhere. Yeah.
And before we wrap up today, I know there's a ton of stuff here. We're just not going to have time to discuss. But Tyler, I wanted to kind of zoom out. We do have some funding items, but we also have some layoffs here. So I think it's a interesting juxtaposition. That we're still seeing. LP money. That needs to be spent. VCs are still spending that money. But then all the acquisitions, I don't know if it's or not acquisitions, sorry, layoffs that we're seeing happen to be companies who are unicorns, who fairly recently declared that they were unicorns. So it's So there's that, and I do have down here a little bit, number 30. Where is it? Where did I put these? I put our posts in here somewhere, Tyler.
Yes, I saw them earlier.
Yeah, 31 and 32, the zombie corn posts. So your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on the? Are we going to continue to see?
It turns out I have to unmute to answer your question.
Okay.
I was going to say, don't you have any comments on the
have you known
characteristically quiet on that one? I thought I threw you a softball, man.
You 100% lobbed it up for me, and I told you the number that it was on, everything. So
okay.
It turns out we're in this weird state of affairs with regards to businesses. They overinvested, overinflated, overvalued throughout 2021 and into early 2022, which put them in a weird state of being overfunded and having an inability to efficiently deploy the capital. Thus, the need for layoffs. But at the same time, there's so much dry powder on the side of investing, which is money ready to be invested, that there's some fantastic opportunities to look at small businesses in a down market that we can get involved with and invest in and watch them grow throughout the recovery of the market over the next 3 to 5 years. That, investments are occurring too. So we're just in this weird state where there's a reconciliation occurring for overly valued companies, right? And so really, I think it's a situation where we're merging a state of unicorns with a state of zombie companies, right? Zombie companies being companies that are in a state of what did we call it the other day, Adrian? Default dead.
Yeah, and default dead being that they've got capital, but not maybe not enough runway. Maybe they're not going to raise another round, so they're dead and just don't know it yet, right?
Right, and that's kind of the zombie world, right? Is this default dead state companies that may have a ton of capital, but have a valuation that's so high that it's literally going to take them way too long to ever get to that valuation. And so, you and I we created this term called zombie corns, which is a cross of a unicorn and a zombie company, right?
You get full credit for that.
Oh, no. We did it together on this pod. This pod created zombie corns. But I wrote a piece about, it's a tongue-in-cheek piece relating the movie Zombieland to zombie corns and how to survive the zombie corn apocalypse, which I think is a fun read. But the cool part was that you went through and you actually put a bunch of data behind it, and you did research and did actual journalism as opposed to my high-level snark writing. But yeah, I think we're just in this weird state where layoffs have to occur for the zombie corns of the universe to remain viable companies over time. And that's why we're seeing these massive layoffs simultaneously to large scale investments occurring.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure that there's really any kind of, anything in the past we can point to. I mean, the 2008 recession, we saw the NAC space get hit kind of hard, but we've never really seen mass layoffs across the cybersecurity industry. So it's I think it was
last time we may have seen that, honestly, was the .com days, and the cybersecurity industry didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
There was you could count on one or two hands the total number of cybersecurity companies in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So this is a reckoning for the cybersecurity industry to come to terms with what the valuations really need to be today. And they haven't been through it before. A lot of the cybersecurity leaders haven't been down this negative push ride before. Now, some of them have been down recessions, and some of them have been down situations like the .com days, but not in a cybersecurity capacity. So specifically how the cybersecurity market will react to this kind of downward forces is difficult, right? It's difficult to know in advance exactly what's going to happen. But, I think that the key to surviving being a zombie corn is being aggressive on your cuts, cutting deep, doing it once, and being transparent, and really, focusing on culture, focusing on a reset, finding a way to reset your business to a valuation, a size, a business model, and a growth rate that makes sense given today's economy. And it's just not easy to do. It takes massive, massive moves in a lot of these overfunded companies.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shift in operation too, right? You can't keep operating the same way you were when you were hiring 100 employees a month.
Yeah, you got to change the business model to match the realities of the market, right? And that's what a lot of companies are struggling to do right now.
And right before we wrap, I just want to call out Networks acquired Remediant, which is I think one of we've only seen a few acquisitions, and since we had this downturn in the market and the layoffs began, it's good to see that we're still seeing acquisitions. I think we threw out there when the market was when the layoffs began and the unicorns stopped, that this would be a buyer's market. But I think our guess is that maybe companies in the early days of it had a hard time agreeing on a new valuation, because basically, the buyers are saying, look, those unicorn valuations you got before, you're not getting that in today's market, right?
That's right.
Obviously the companies getting acquired want to maximize the value for themselves, their investors, and their employees. So I think it took a couple of months for us to start to see the acquisitions, and the only one we have a comp for is Palo Alto picking up cybersecurity for $195 million on $38 million raised. So that's roughly 5x on money raised. So it's not terrible, and it's a really tough comp to use because they weren't even a year out of stealth. Very, very early stage, and Palo Alto. The way they acquire companies, the deal sizes they do are kind of weird anyway. I'm surprised it wasn't a round number. Almost all their acquisitions are perfectly round numbers. But yeah, no, it's good to still see acquisitions here. Networks looks like it's doing kind of a Fortra type thing where this is their 6th acquisition since getting picked up by PE firm TA Associates back in 2020. So they're putting together a war chest of security technologies and companies.
Yeah, we're going to see.
I think it's a smart thing to do right now. Right,
we're going to see continued consolidation, both at a tool level and a platform level throughout 2023, but certainly at a corporate development level, right? Even just at a pure business level, 2023 is going to be the year of cybersecurity acquisitions. You're exactly right. Why it hasn't happened yet. When there's enough runway and you don't have to sell, you can sit there as a founder and say, I'm going to wait. Maybe it turns. But if it doesn't turn, and the longer this macroeconomic downturn continues to run out, the more pressure will happen for these companies to sell off. And private equity is going to be ready. They got tons of powder on the side, ready to do roll-ups, ready to pull things together, ready to unify different markets. And so I think this is the year of private equity really getting heavy into security. And this is the year of acquisitions. And I think we can call it the harvesting, right? In many ways, it's like the final harvesting of 2 to 3 years.
Sounds like a horror movie. The harvesting.
You know what it is? It's it's like the quickening or the harvesting. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's finally coming to harvest all of the wheat that has been grown over the last 2 to 3 years. It's going to be harvested in 2023.
All right. And with that, I think that's all the time we've got today. Sean, are you still here, Sean?
I'm still here, yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us today,
I go
Sean.
quiet when Tyler starts talking about the VC world, because I'm listening quite aptly to it, because I don't know as much about that area as he does. Always interested to learn.
Thank you, John.
Well, Sean, Katie, Tyler, thanks for being here. Happy New Year to all of you and to everyone listening. And we will be back next week.